Good evening, it's Peter speaking, and welcome to my little webinar. Thank you for coming. It's my honor to be able to talk to you about what I've been doing for some time. But before we start, can I invite you all to just take a moment's silence, a mindful minute, I call it. So just to settle yourself in terms of what you'd like to hear and how you'd like to hear it, and even what questions you might like to ask. Okay, thank you. I'd like to just talk about why I am doing this webinar. And it's partly because I get asked from time to time often about my work. And it has been very unusual work, which I'll describe later. About 15 years ago, I wrote this book for the same sort of reason, The Wisdom of Passion. And that was to capture some of what I'd learned through the passion mapping process. So I'd like to start in terms of what my journey has been around this topic. And it started close to 20 years ago when I was working with another fellow, and we were doing a project, and I was going through a big life crisis, and I couldn't really put one foot in front of another. So he suggested that we look at things and what was important, and he was doing a Gestalt therapy session and or process, learning journey, and he said, why don't we put all the things you love on a board, Peter, and then you'll know what we want to do, and we can move on with the project. Well, I did that by putting sticky notes up on a board, and then the wind came and dropped down a couple onto the floor. I was feeling very frustrated because we weren't going anywhere. I stamped on one, and I had a really strong physical sensation in my body. And I was thinking, well, I thought that was just my own angst. But then I actually stamped on another one, and I had a different experience. So that sort of twigged me to think, well, wow, what's going on here? What's my body telling me? How can I work with this? And over time, I developed a process of bringing this together, worked with friends really for a while, and always seemed to have a strong experience. Along the way, someone said to me, Peter, what you're doing is, I think, a passion map. And I thought, that's a nice name. I'll take that. So I appropriated the name Passion Map. And then the journey started, because working with that, I was, drawn to the understanding what is passion and how do you work with it. So I've come to the conclusion that passion is really just our life force. It's energy in our bodies. It's our unique expression of who we are. And I'll get into that a little later. So when we think about passion, for me, it's about energy. And when you work with passion, it's about working with sorry, I'm getting some assistance here. We're needing to coordinate a bit better. Okay, so I've lost my train of thought a bit, but working with passion is working with the energy in our bodies. And I've come to the conclusion through working with many people that our bodies know so much more than our minds do about ourselves, our direction, what makes life meaningful for us, the signals they give us, etc. And I've learned that the body has many, many subtle signals that we don't normally get. Especially if we live in cities, we've closed most of our senses down because we have so many sensations hitting us that we can't deal with them. And so we close them off and we don't feel our senses. And as such, we turn off our intuition. We turn off our access to our inner self. So the passion programs that I've done have looked at rectifying that and using the subtle energies of the body rather than the big energies like a gut feeling or shiver up the spine or sweaty hands, whatever the body is doing. Those big ones are easy. The subtle ones are not so easy, and we need to be in a certain space to access them, but each one of them tells us a story. So our bodies know more than our minds. Another thing that I've discovered is that when we create passion maps, and passion maps are basically a process that I developed with a lot of assistance from lots of other people, which is the essence of all of the things that bring us alive, typically about 15 or 16, with very precise language in a very precise form. But what we found is that it's not coherent. You can't get the integrated capacity of all of those elements without actually qualities that bring them alive. It's been very interesting that you can't get this deep inner integrity or this deep inner pattern without dealing with both our being and our doing. So that's been a really, really interesting journey. Another thing that has come about in my journey is the development of a model. And I'm quite proud of this model because it's actually underlies most of my work. Basically, there are 4 powers of passion, if you like, in my model. The first is the capacity to track it to source, which I would call in. So when we track our passions, again with precision, to a deep inner place, I call that in, and we have a deep sense of ourselves. And if we track all of them at once, as we do when we're forming a passion map, we actually have a sense of being in this place, the deep expression of ourselves, the deeper sense of self, the deeper sense of integrated self. And that is a very beautiful place. And not many people have ever felt that way before doing this work. The next component of this is going out. And going out is what we normally think of passion. It's action in the world. And it guides us, and it guides our purpose, guides our vision. So it helps to set direction for us. The third component is together. And nothing bonds people more than togetherness. Nothing bonds people. We don't acknowledge this, I don't think, especially in businesses, how the power of people who are passionate about the same things working together. And the fourth one is a little bit obscure, and that comes from both experimental and observation. We can actually create conscious spaces in which to bring passion alive. Now, I'm not going into the detail of these because I wanted to get through really quite a lot of ideas, and I wanted to invite you to ask questions about anything that arises. I could run a whole webinar just on this topic, but I'm not going to, obviously. So back to the model. The fourth is in space. It's also about passion staying in a place. You go to an Apple store when it's closed, you still feel the passion for the technology. You can go into a stadium with no people and you can feel the passion of the fans. It's really interesting. I don't know, I've got no idea how it works, but it works. So another thing that I've learned is that passions have shape and direction. Even though they're energetic forms, they do have particular shapes, and they certainly have certain directions. They pull us towards certain things. Excuse me. And that's most interesting because our passions don't necessarily bring us to one place. They take us to different places, and we don't normally experience a lot of them together. So when we create a passion map per se, we harmonize those directions and towards a particular intention. So the passions work together rather than work apart. And in terms of the shape, we actually create patterns of different elements. And there's extraordinary power in the coherence and the integrity and the wholeness of a shape, which includes all our passions. So if we move on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about language. And this is something that I find fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Part of our process is that for each of the passions that people have, we have a conversation with them to find what words bring them alive the most. Normally, when we have conversations with people, we share our stories, we have discussions or mini debates or talk about common interests. We don't normally follow the energy of the person that we're speaking to. But I invite you to try this sometime with friends. When they're talking about something, see if you can take the direction of the conversation towards their energy, not towards their logic, and see where you end up. Fascinating. So the language of passion is quite remarkable. And yeah, as I said, just try and play with that. Now, this is an important one too, around the power of passion and the power of qualities. So we all suffer from I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, or I'm not enough, or, you know, I'm too scared to do that, or whatever. There are always times that we're not enough. We're not able to live with just ease and grace and presence because there's some negative mindset that's attacking us or stopping us from doing that. And sometimes I say that the most creative way that people ever are, many people ever are, is the way they stop themselves from being as great as they can be. Bit strange that, isn't it? That we're so creative in stopping ourselves. We're not necessarily creative in making ourselves as great as we can be. And getting back to the negative mindsets, the thing that we have found is that we can use passion and we can use qualities to neutralize these negative mindsets and change them. So, for example, if someone is feeling fearful of stepping into their greater self or their confident self or whatever, what we can do is to find the opposite of that. What's the energy at the other side of that negative mindset? And that might be courage. And it's not easy to learn to be courageous, but we can do it with the help of an embodied process which actually treats courage like a passion element. So this is something you can try as well. We invite people to stand on a passion disc every morning, and on that disc is the word courage. Or if it's not courage, it's the specific term that brings about the most courage in their bodies. And I've done this at times when I've had the words, these powerful words, and the first thing I do is get out of bed to stand on them. And so I bring courage into my body directly rather than through my mind. And it is so much more powerful. Try it and see. see how you go. Now, you might think this is pretty obvious, everyone's passions are unique. But in fact, they're extraordinarily unique. They're unique in many, many ways. They're unique in their focus. They're unique in the language that most enables them to be expressed. They're unique in how powerful they are, or their intensity. They're unique in how much we're living them. It's almost like every passion is a little universe of energy to be explored. And it's only through having worked with many, many, many people that I have this sense of, what it is to explore passions, what it is to enable them to get inside and understand their inner reality around their own life energy. And so I've come to the place of great respect for every individual's uniqueness in this area. Every passion is unique. Every combination of passions is unique. And certainly every total expression of who we are as individuals through our passions are unique. Unfortunately, using the power of passion model, we can actually work with that. And the next thing I wanted to actually talk about, which was interesting, is just some specific patterns that I've noticed. And there are many, many patterns, but I just mentioned 3. And thinking back to what passion is, it's energy in the body. And we need to help people to understand and connect with that energy. So most of us experience most of our passions inside our bodies. But healers don't. Healers often feel energy way beyond themselves. In the same way as Indigenous people usually feel their energy into the earth. So the culture of connecting with the earth and connecting spiritually with the earth is actually very real when you actually look at what happens to people. So many types of people have different patterns. One other thing I'd mention about Indigenous people, which I've found both sad and thrilling, is that the energetic patterns are both from their Indigenous nature and also from their modern nature or the prevailing culture. And often they feel very, very split. And I've worked with a number of people, and to hear from them, look, this is the first time I've ever felt whole, is just beautiful to hear. And beautiful to be in a position to make that sort of contribution to someone's life, to give them the opportunity to feel whole for the first time. Again, I could do a whole webinar on Indigenous experiences, but I won't. And instead, I'll talk to you about animals briefly. Now, one of the things that I could never quite understand is how connected people were with their animals, especially if their animals died, they'd go into grieving. It just seemed too much to me when I was a young man. But I fully understand that now, because when we connect people to the energy they feel in their body when they are connected to their animals, it's the same as friends. It's really almost the same energy that people feel towards their animals and their friends. And recent neuroscience has shown that, not neuroscience, but neurobiology, I suppose it would be, has shown that similar hormones are released when people connect with friends or connect with animals. So some of this is now being proved scientifically. Anyway, it's very, very interesting to think about the individual patterns that we all hold. Now, I thought I'd talk a little bit about women's patterns that I've experienced and some of the issues that arise when we work with women. Now, women's passion maps are generally more round and less directed than men's, as you'd probably expect, but they turn out to be like that. And they also, in many ways, women have a challenge in actually stepping into the wholeness of who they are. So women can actually, in my experience, and I know I'm being very general here, stereotypical, but it does happen a lot, where women can almost get to a sense of who they are more easily than men, but to step totally into that is not easy for them. And it may be that they need to connect with their own inner courage to make that, to bring that alive. Again, they can do this energetically far more easily than they can do it intellectually through their willpower. And I did have the unique experience of working with 20 very powerful women consultants from one of the world's leading firms. And they came from all over the world. And my task was to work with them to find out how they could be a distinctive asset to the firm. That was the brief. So my team worked with them all individually and then collectively. And they flew all over the world, from all over the world, to come together and create their own unique passion map. Now, what was really interesting about this was not necessarily all of the things they did, which was starting a leadership program, which was starting an international not-for-profit around women's health, to start a networking program or a networking system, to create a political system for women in the firm, to create a series of awards for men who most supported women. All of this happened in one day with the power of passion. But what amazed me most is that even though these women were on top of the world in what they did, they were absolutely surprised at the power they had collectively. When they came together from their passions as women and not coming together within the frame of a male-dominant company. So I was thrilled to see that, and I think we have huge possibilities for women to come together and connect in different ways and create from their essential feminineness. So yeah, there are different patterns for men and women, and there are different ways that we come together energetically, and there's different power that's released. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I'm very interested in Tantra, because Tantra brings together male and female energetic patterns and builds enormous respect for the other gender, enormous respect. It doesn't work without both bringing who they are as men and women. So I'm getting to the end of my talk, and until the last point, I've largely talked about individual things. But I do want to touch on relationship. Again, I could easily do a whole webinar on what I've learned about relationships and what makes them come together and what makes them harmonious. And I do want to talk about stability, because we've worked with, excuse me, retreats for senior leaders. And we had one client who came to the conclusion that working with individuals and spouses and collectively was much more powerful than just working with the directors themselves. And there's some really good reason for this. When we create our own individual passion map, we have a deeper sense of ourself, we have a more stable sense of self, and we have, a different sense of self. Nevertheless, we can still get knocked off center pretty easily at times through things that and we feel, you know, quite substantial stress in this crazy world we're living in now. So if you can imagine a couple each doing their own passion map, coming to a different place in themselves, wanting to live from a different place in themselves, then you've got like two pillars of a chair, or two legs of a chair. But when you add the relationship program in, a relationship map, which is a third phenomenon, it's like the third leg of the chair, and the whole system becomes far more stable. So if people want to live from a higher sense of awareness, from a greater sense of their own inner power, from their own sense of presence, then it really helps to have this three-legged chair, this stable structure. And the interesting thing about relationship passion maps is they're far more stable in themselves than individual maps. I have some relationship maps with people that I work with, and our individual maps have changed a lot through time, but our relationship maps don't tend to do so. They tend to be more stable. So I'm really interested in starting to investigate, you know, how we create stability through relationship, and how relationship supports stability in ourselves and in our lives. So that's basically my presentation. As I said, I could probably run a webinar on every one of those elements. But I did want to, you know, open this up to questions. And can you and so I'm going to just open this again. And I'll open it to any questions that you might have. And yeah, it's over to you. So in order to do that, all you need to do is to click the chat box, I think, isn't it? We ask a question.
Or the Q&A.
Or hit the Q&A box. Okay, thank you very much to someone. Just a second. Who is it? Yeah, Phil. Phil Lavelle. Hi, Phil. Thanks for joining us. You've asked, provide examples of the following energy of language. Yeah, I had one recently when I was working in Bangkok, and there was a Thai woman, very, you know, enthusiastic Thai woman, and she had this dream of building a passion club, and she'd had it for ages. And then she thought, you know, when she actually engaged with the energy of the passion club in her body, it was very, very heavy. She didn't like it at all, even though her mind said, well, we love to do that. Okay. So we played with it, and then she started talking about it, moving her arms as if she was conducting an orchestra. And so the question was then, can you engage with conducting the passion club? And then when she engaged with those words, suddenly it was incredibly uplifting for her. And I thought, how can just those two word changes create a totally different state? From her body, which was completely heavy, full body heaviness, it came to a full body lightness and enthusiasm and effervescence. So that's one example. Another example I have is my lawyer at one stage, who I worked with, you know, in terms of getting IP protection around the world. We worked closely for 2 or 3 years on this. And then it got the better of him, and he said, I want to do a passion map. Anyway, one of his elements was he wanted to feel less back pain. He'd had a back operation, felt a lot of back pain. and this for years. And so he was standing on this element, less back pain. And what happened is that, you know, it was a lot of pain. It's like, excuse me, it was a lot of pain. Don't think of an elephant, you know, you think of an elephant. And we played with the language, and I can't remember the exact words, but we worked with whole different types of words until we came to a place where he had no back pain. There was a language which actually unlocked all of the pain and got to the point of being healthy and well and whatever. As I said, I don't remember exactly what it was, but there are a couple of examples, Phil. There are hundreds of them, but there are a couple of strong ones. So thank you. Now, Korshed, thank you for your question. Give examples of how passion mapping has helped team development within an organisation. Well, I can think of a number of teams I've worked with, and the process of that is to, again, start with an individual. Passion map yourself, and then the team develops a map itself. It's done by creating a shared intention, the highest intention for the team. And again, this is rarely done in teams. You know, as a team, who are we and what do we actually stand for at the highest level? So that has been used for creating coherence, and it actually can be used for integrating really diverse teams. And I just, excuse me, I'll just give you an example of a program that I've run a few times, the International Organizational Development Association. And my task is to bring all these disparate people who come to this conference together and form a team in the morning, and to get a plan together to work on real projects in the afternoon. So they go out and they work in real projects. Now, these people are from all over the world, all ages, all backgrounds, genders. And when you actually ask them to connect at the level of passion around what the project is, you automatically create this bonding, create this coherence. And that would, combined with a shared intention, creates a really strong sense of collective identity, and then they can create their collective sort of structure to work with the client. So I think in many cases with teams, my experience is that that many times people don't think, well, who are we? You know, all of the intention is about what we do. It's not about who we are and the doing of it. And as I started this presentation with, we found that unless you do that, you can't get the power of the collective really happening. So I hope that's answered your question. And I'll ask them. Oh, Roma, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I love to hear your stories. Well, there's plenty of them, so I'll keep them coming if you like. What's changed around conducting passion mapping over the years? Wow, an enormous amount. We're in the process now of developing an app, and one of the purposes of that app is to enable coaches to work remotely with their clients. So that was never conceived of in the past. We now have, the app has a way that passion mapping can integrate this state into life, into work, into whatever way that we want to be. So I think I've learned a lot to be much more flexible. I think we can create passion maps around anything now. It used to be just about life, and we call that a classic now, but you can equally create a passion map about something else, because it's about combining the energy and using these principles of the power of passion to create outcomes. And you know, the difficult thing for me is actually explaining what we can do, because it's so profound. people don't really believe that it can be done, but it can be, and it's really beautiful to do. When you talk about over the years, I'm retiring from a period of retirement of 6 or 7 years. So I'm doing things quite differently. I've been through some more stuff and personal evolution, I suppose. I'm coming to this from a more spiritual place. I come to the work from seeing my client as an extraordinarily unique human being, expression of spirit, expression of who they are, and come as almost a spiritual explorer to understand the essence of who they are. Because my feeling is every time I work with someone, I learn something about them, and in turn I learn about myself. I also find something special about everyone I work with, and that expands my sense of what's possible as a human being. So I just feel so incredibly blessed to have done this work with so many different people. And even last week I was working with a professional singer and with some IT people in the same room. And just to see the incredible diversity between them was just amazing. So yeah, things, I could go on and on, but that's probably enough to start with. So now I've got something from Uwe. Yeah, that's a really good question, Uwe. Coming back to language, have you experienced differences for the same word in different language? For example, passion in German is Leidenschaft, quite a complex word compared with passion. No, I haven't done a lot of work with Germans, although there's a German coach in Sydney who has done quite a lot of work, and she seems to be able to manage quite easily in either language. It's not actually the form of the language, it's actually what the poetic nature of the language is. What does that word instill in us? How does it energize us? And, you know, so in our work, the word passion would come up if that came up as an element, if that came up as a particular quality that was really important for people. But yeah, I haven't worked directly with German people, but I know clients who have, and it seems to work okay. I mean, this is universal stuff. And what we also encourage people to do who are bilingual is to use both. And in some circumstances, they might want to use an English word, or they might want to use a German word. But if they can't find either, they can just do a diagram. They can write it, you know, draw a picture. They do something that captures the essence of what that energetic is. So, yeah, hope that answers your question. Now I've got another question here from, have you encountered resistance, or have people who've come with you the intention to learn, and what happened? Anyway, and maybe they encountered resistance. Yeah. I think a lot of people have resistance. A lot of people have resistance to exploring who they are. And I don't know why it is, this weird thing about the human condition, that we don't allow ourselves to be as good as we can be, as great as we can be, as courageous as we can be, as loving as we can be, as integrated as we can be, as present as we can be. We don't allow ourselves to do that. We're the ones who stop us. No one else stops us. And you can argue that our children, as children, we learn things that aren't worthwhile. Oh, so stop coughing. Yeah, so a lot of resistance. Some people resist even feeling. Some people resist visioning. Some people resist, you know, being able to know things. So we have tricks around this. You know, there's a lot of when people say they don't know, we often will say, well, if you did know, what would it be? And most of the time they know. All they're doing is switching from their left side of their brain, which holds the negative, and moving into a more expansive state in the right side of the brain. We have people who so they can't vision. We say, well, that's okay, no problem. We've got other processes we can use. And then suddenly they can vision. I think it's a bit like, some women who say they can't have babies. And as soon as they say, well, I can't have them, and they give up trying, they have babies. I don't know what that is, but it just seems to be fairly common that that's the case. So, and some people just refuse to look inside. Some people know that if they look inside, they're out of integrity, and they just don't want to face that. And I respect that. That's where they are. If they change that, we'll work with them. But that's the case. Okay, we've got an anonymous attendee. What opportunities there are to experience passion mapping currently? As I said, I'm now restarting the business. There are, of the 100 or so people I've trained, there's still a few in different parts of the world who are still facilitating maps. There's a few in Australia. The best way to do that is to work with someone one-on-one, is to connect with us or connect with me on the website. Another thing is that we're looking to do is to develop a program where 3 people can work remotely. And I'm about to run a pilot on that. If you're interested in that, then you could connect with me and maybe you could be part of that group. There will need to be one person who's a coach, who's got coaching sort of qualifications, is part of the 3, because there's going to be, like a mapper and a facilitator or a coach and an observer. And our work now is becoming more, not just the map, not just looking at the passion, but also how do you actually bring it alive, and then, that new state, and how do you keep it going? And the app is going to have all sorts of different ways to do that, different ways from stopping you losing, the benefit of what you've been through in a program. I think the best way to contact, to find out, is if you contact Passion Maps through the website, or contact me. You can actually book a call and we can talk about the particular situation, whether it's individual, whether it's for business, whether it's a team, whether, what is it you actually want? And why do you want to experience passion mapping? What is your intention? So that's, I think that's the end of the questions. And I would just like to express my gratitude for you being, each of you coming and hearing some stories, and hopefully there's been some useful stuff in that. There's been a few older friends who I haven't heard from for a long time, and that's really beautiful for me. I feel surrounded by, beautiful people, just as I do this. And I know there's, people in the States and Canada and Australia, and that's really beautiful for me. So thank you. I'd also love to hear if you'd like to me to run a webinar on any particular topic. It would be really, it's one thing for me to just think, well, this is useful, but it's another thing to respond to a real request. And so if you want to know something about passion, embodiment, working in organizations, relationship stuff, just let me know and we'll see if we can accommodate you. So thanks again and travel well. Bye.